Welcome to the stage, the 108th Mayor of New York City, Michael R. Bloomberg, the founder of Bloomberg Philanthropies.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 9th annual CityLab. I can't wait for next year. We'll have an excuse to do it even bigger and better, but we're going to take everything that we learned from this year and incorporate it in the future. And the incredible performance that we just watched, let's give them another round of applause. I also want to thank Mayor Helsima for welcoming us to her city. Mayor, given the histories of our two cities, I feel right at home. In fact, while I've been here, I've begun introducing myself as the former mayor of New Amsterdam. It's great to be back here in person for this event for the first time in 3 years, and over that time, we've weathered COVID-19, shocks to our supply system, spikes to our energy prices, shortages in the labor market, and severe natural disasters worsened by climate change that inexplicably some people don't think is happening. You just have to look at the television to see things, the real results of climate change, and how anybody can be a denier at this point is just inconceivable. They literally aren't thinking. Just take a look at the floods and the droughts. You take a look at the fires and the melting of the ice. Something is going on out there, and our future is in jeopardy. So no matter what you think it's called, or what you think how often you think it's going to happen, or how severe it's going to be, to run the risk of ending the world is not something that's very smart, and we've just got to do something about it. And you've just got to make sure that everybody understands there are real-world consequences to climate change, and you can see them right now, and it could happen to your city just as much as it could happen to somebody else's. So I hate to start out with somber thoughts, but after the floods we've had in Florida and in Pakistan, after the fires we've had in Europe and in western United States, after the poles at both north and south melting with the glaciers, there's something going on, folks. So let's stop and think about it and be sure that we push our people. And of course, also make sure that everybody understands the humanitarian and refugee crisis prompted by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I just talked to the mayor of Ukraine 5 minutes ago. The Russians are shelling his city, and people are dying. And no matter how successful the Ukrainian army has been, the bottom line is there's still a war going on, and people are getting killed, and it's just got to stop. City leaders are right in the middle of the challenges we all face and the changes that are taking place in our world. The challenge you face is to deliver results today while also finding ways to innovate and to invest for the long term. Everybody can say that, but as we all know, it's easier to say it than to do it. However, it's something that wasn't readily available when I came into office 20 years ago, as a global support network. And so you are in better shape to face some of these things. You'll have better information. You can share strategies and share ideas. I was elected in New York only 7 weeks after the 9/11 attacks, and the challenges that we faced bringing the city back while also tackling issues that had been ignored for decades, such as our schools that weren't performing, our waterfront that was falling apart, our transportation network that wasn't adequate for people to get around and get to work, and even our economy had grown far too dependent on one industry, Wall Street, and we just didn't have a playbook of what to do then. Nobody had tried to face those kind of things together. There was no easy ways back then for mayors to borrow ideas from one another or to learn from one another. And so over time, we decided to send staff members to cities around the world to learn from them And that was a unique thing. The press couldn't understand why we would look elsewhere. In fact, one of the things about the press is that they tend to be very isolated to the area that they cover. They tend to come from that area. They can only write about that area. They haven't traveled as well as they should, and they can't put things in perspective of if it's done here, maybe the same problem is elsewhere, and that other people have found ways to address that. I think we have come a long ways from back in the early 2020s to accept ideas from far away, but we're still not there. Our instincts are always at home, and our whole world is only at home. Can't let that happen. Here in Amsterdam, we learned that biking, for example, wasn't just some Dutch cultural oddity. It's an integral part of the economy here, and in bringing people to shops and small businesses, it keeps things going. And that's how we ended up making major investments in bike lanes in New York City and a bike share program, because we saw that it worked so well here and in Paris as well. We learned about bus rapid transit from Bogota, and we brought that to New York City as well, and it speeded up people's ability to get to their place of work and to access the city from homes further out that they could better afford. We also visited Mexico City to learn about innovative poverty programs, and we tested some of those programs in New York, and some worked and some didn't. That's the nature of innovation. Not every idea is going to be applicable elsewhere or pan out the second time, even in the same place. But if you have a 100% success ratio, you're not setting the bar high enough. And I've been giving a lecture to some military people who, in the military, you don't want to have any blemishes in your career path. It'll just be stopped. And if you don't have blemishes, then you didn't innovate, and that's the problem. If you show me somebody with a 100% success ratio, I will show you somebody that's not taking enough risk. The more we learned from the experiences of other cities, the more we realized how powerful it would be for local leaders to have easier access to their colleagues around the world. And so another thing we did over the past decades that our foundation has worked to invest in networks and programs that allow mayors and other local leaders to learn from, with one another and spread innovative ideas. Bloomberg Philanthropies will continue to expand our support for that work, including an area that holds a lot of promise, using data to build digital networks. And through our City Data Alliance, we're helping mayors across America put data to work for them by developing and deploying digital tools that improve public services. An example would be our innovation teams, or I-teams as we call them, are helping city halls pioneer new digital strategies to engage the public in policy-making process. If people get engaged, they are supportive, and if they are left out, they are not. So if you want to make progress, you just have to make sure that everybody thinks it's, if not their idea, but at least they had an input. In fact, right here in Amsterdam, we are helping city officials use technology to engage residents. And from one of its lowest income communities, we found the key in planning decisions about civic spaces, affordable housing, and more was to ask the local people, what do you need? What works? What doesn't? This group, I'd suggest probably nobody here is without a home. So to ask us to know what it feels like to not have a home to go back to after work or not have a job is something that we've got to ask people and listen to them, because we may think we're experts on it, but if we haven't lived it, we are not. Today, whether it's responding to COVID-19 or humanitarian crisis or climate change, mayors don't walk alone, thankfully. There's now a global network to help them find ideas and insights, and the CityLab really does lie at the heart of that. Yesterday, over 40 mayors spent the day sharing ideas and learning from top experts about strategies for bringing people together and back to their urban centers. That's one of the biggest challenges facing mayors across the world. And so today, our foundation is announcing a new investment called the Bloomberg Initiative for cycling infrastructure to support, yes. Thank you for the applause. I was afraid you were going to ask whether I bicycle to work. I do not, but I can't give you a good example as to why not. An enormous number of our employees do. But more bikes and more bicycle lanes won't solve all the downtown challenges, of course. And we've seen how they can increase economic activity and promote vitality in urban centers while also reducing traffic congestion and air pollution. But at the same time, walking is another ways to do it, and there's some people that just have to take their own automobile, that mass transit hasn't reached them. But the whole secret to a successful big city is you have the central city for some people that can afford it and have to be very close to work, and then some people that live farther away that provide a lot of the services. We have to make sure that they can get to work in a reasonable period of time at an affordable price. And it's a business model that works as long as you provide that transportation link. We've seen how we can increase economic activity and promote vitality in urban centers while also reducing congestion and air pollution. And I think it's only fitting that we made the announcement here in Amsterdam, which inspired so much of our work in New York, and that's truly how they've done the same thing in other cities as well. 15 years ago, New York learned from Amsterdam and Bogota and Paris and Mexico City and other cities. In other cities, it was considered big news that we were taking ideas from elsewhere. Cities have been very isolated and insular. You only deal within your city, you only read press that talks about what goes on in your city, and yet every city I know of, there are transportation problems and sanitation problems and crime problems. There are people who want something and don't want to pay for it. It's exactly the same thing, and so to not learn is just being silly. Cities learning from each other, I'm happy to say, have become more the norm, but still not as much as it needs to be. An awful lot of our citizens just literally don't think beyond their city, and an awful lot of them have never been outside of their city. I've asked people where the Ukraine is. It dominates the news, and yet most New Yorkers that I talk to just have no idea where it is. In fact, if you gave Americans a map of the world with country borders outlined but no names of the cities, most Americans could not find China. They certainly couldn't find the Ukraine, and that's not a bad reflection on New Yorkers. It is just true that most people know their own little world, where they go and what they can see, and if it's further out than that, they just don't have any understanding of it, and they don't think about including it. And that's what you can really bring home to them, that we don't have all the ideas, and that other people who speak one of those funny languages that we don't understand and are never going to learn, they have some things that we can bring home right now at relatively low cost or zero cost and use them. And that's the mayor's job, to open their eyes to what's possible and to get started and leave a legacy to the next generation, the next mayor, of things that work and the attitude that we don't know everything, others have good ideas. Learning from others, we've seen the benefits, including some of the biggest and most urgent issues. During the pandemic, U.S. mayors shared ideas and strategies with each other when our federal government was in disarray and even denial. The federal governments of this world are no less guilty than cities in terms of reaching out and understanding and thinking that other people have good ideas. And this year, after Russia invaded the Ukraine, the networks of cities that help mayors respond as refugees have entered neighboring places and cities have been really useful. You're seeing what somebody else did when their borders were crossed by lots of people who don't speak the same language, don't have the same religions or culture or experiences, and how you deal with that. And you're going to have to do that more and more, unfortunately, as the world gets more difficult with climate change. The mayors of Warsaw and Riga and Vilnius and many other places have been sharing real-time response to humanitarian crises, and we've got to bring those techniques back to our cities. And we're so glad that a number of these mayors, including 2 from the Ukraine, will be sharing stories with us over the next 2 days. So I would listen very carefully and say, I never thought about that. Does that apply? Could we do that in our city? I know it's different, but I want to go home and say that I really learned something, and I'm willing to try something new. And did you know that they do that on the other side of the world? And people are going to say, wow, that mayor's really smart. I didn't know that. Well, you could have read The Economist and found out about it. But, and that's another thing I would suggest to all of you. Take a look at what goes on in the rest of the world. Read some magazines and the international sections of newspapers. Don't just focus on the local stuff. What's happening elsewhere is germane, or could be, or certainly in many cases is germane to what you have to do. Let me leave you with one last thought. Lyndon Johnson, who was president of the United States, I guess when I was getting out of college during the Vietnam War, had a thought that I think is very germane to us at a speech in Chicago back in 1966. When I was going to work, I was finished with graduate school. I don't think there's anybody else in the room that is as old as I, but back then we had a civilization as well. And what Lyndon... and we had the same problems, incidentally. What Lyndon Johnson said, whatever the burdens of the presidency, whenever the burdens of the presidency seemed unusually heavy, I always remind myself it could be worse. I could be a mayor. Now, Lyndon Johnson, he never was a mayor. He was in Congress and the Senate and then became vice president and president of the United States when Kennedy was assassinated. He understood the unique burdens of the job and the importance of the job. And that's why we're all here, because the opportunity that mayors, city leaders, urban innovators, and experts really can make a difference in the world. And over the next few days, I hope that you'll hear some new ideas and make new connections, that you can take them home and adapt them, tweak them, change them, take part of them, or discard them if they don't fit. There's nothing magical about the other people's ideas, but they are just expand the whole universe of options that you have. And more importantly, I hope you leave here with a sense of renewed purpose about the challenges ahead. So enjoy Amsterdam, but not too much. We don't want you arrested and having to have the mayor bail you out. And it's not, I asked her before whether she could fix a parking ticket for me, and I did not get a great response. I said, come on, we're bringing all this business. She said, you shouldn't park there.